Okay, in this demonstration I am going to walk you through setting up your typography project. This project is a book. However, the way I'm going to show you how to set it up, I'm going to kind of treat it a little bit more like an ebook. What the difference is that when you're creating a regular book, you have facing pages. So you kind of have to design with that, keeping that in mind. Since we're doing an ebook, we're going to kind of work on individual pages. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be showing you how to set this up. The units I use are inches. Yours may or may not be set up that way. So first thing I need to do is create a new document. So you can see right here I have it set to inches. If that's not the case, you go to Edit, Preferences, Units. It's similar to all the other Adobe programs. And then under Origin, you can set to whatever units you're comfortable with. But like I said, for this demonstration, I'm going to use inches. So go back to File, New Document. So if you're designing for print, you'll want to have facing pages checked. Since we're not, we're going to have it unchecked. So ebooks are typically 5 by 7 inches or 6 by 9 inches. I'm not holding you to either of those. If you're going to do a rectangular book, those are two great sizes. You can have it in landscape, so 6 by 9 and 7 by 5 is fine. If you go square, I would recommend you doing an 8 by 8 book. That's a common size for square books. So the next, let's get my book in there. I'm going to do a 6 by 9, so that'll be more portrait size. Format. Then we got to think about margins. For a book around this size, I think a 3/4 inch margin will be best. So I'm just going to set this to 0.75 inches. And everything else looks good, so I'm hit OK. So you can see it's giving me that nice guide, which will not appear when I export it. So next thing I'm going to do is open up my Pages window. So here is my master page. As I said in previous demonstrations, master page is kind of a template per se that you're going to be using. So that's where we're going to set up your grid. So if I set up the grid on page 1, it won't carry over unless I drag it down and duplicate it, which can get messy. So what I'm going to do is take my master page and double click on it. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Layout, Create Guides. Again, what grid you use is up to you. I've made a 6 by 9 book before, so I know which one I'm kind of more comfortable with. Again, it kind of depends on it really depends on the kind of information you're going to be putting in the book. If there's a lot of information, obviously a lot more complicated grid is beneficial, but you might want to start simple. So let's make sure that Fit Guides to Margins is checked. I'm going to go ahead and say 6 by 3. So 6 rows, 3 columns, and I'm hit OK. So now, since your first page is automatically created from your first master page, if I double click on page 1, you can see the guides are still there, my grid guides. So if I drag another one here to create page 2, the guides are on that as well. I can always create, let's get rid of this one, a new master page. And B is fine, you can name it what you'd like. I'm going to double click on that, and then I'm going to set a different guide, set of guides to it. So let's say that one was, let's make this nice and simple. Let's say 3 by 4, or 4 rows, 3 columns. Fit Guides to Margins, and OK. So now you can see if I double click on these, there's 2 different sets of guides. So let's just take a look at this page 1. I double click on that, and I'm just going to set up some dummy spaces here. Let's say I have an image there, and I'm going to create some text here. So I'm just going to go grab some lorem ipsum here. Oops. click on that box I created and just paste it in. I want to take this to a moment here to kind of reiterate. For your descriptive text, your body text in your book project, don't use decorative text. You can use that for headings if you'd like, as long as it's legible. But for long pieces of text, I would strongly suggest using something a bit more legible. I have a lot of fonts on my computer, but even if you used, Times New Roman, I'm sure you all have, Century, Schoolbook, Palantino. Of those, I like Palantino the best, so I'm just gonna make this Palantino. And for type size, 12 points is actually considered a display size, meaning it's used for heading, so I wouldn't go larger than 11. You can go as low as for serif fonts, 6 is pretty small, so I would say 8, somewhere between 8 and 11 is my suggestion. And be sure you have it set to optical. So I'm just kind of using this as a demonstration. Let's clip out this text here, just so I have a. All right. So now you can see this is kind of based on my original 3x6 grid. So if I go to my master pages and take, let's rename these. So we'll call this one, just so it's a little bit easier to follow, we'll call this 6x9, and I'll call this one 3x4. All right. So here I kind of have a rough, layout for my first page here. Let's this image a little bit bigger. Doesn't really matter. So if I grab this other master page, which is the 3x4, and drag it onto my first page, you can see that it updates the grid, right? It changes it, which, funny enough, it still lines up to the grid. So let's undo that. So let's say I had it set here, and now I'm going to drag that new master page over here and change the grid. You can see it no longer aligns to the grid, but I can still go in and move stuff around so it does. Got it? So that's a way you can kind of play with your grids, and then whichever one you choose, let's say I go back and use the 6x9, just get rid of the other page. So then you can just keep dragging these down here, and your grid will carry over, and you can use that as a guide, so that if you, let's say go back to this one, and I'm going to make another one that just says a title here and make this a bit bigger. Let's go. That's good. And so it's just back to Palantino. And make it bold. Go. So let's say, that's one setup we have. So just as an example, I'm gonna bring these elements over. I'm just gonna copy and paste it here, which I could have duplicated that too. So now, if I can start to move these things around and try to create a new way of using this grid. Just duplicate that. Since I want this kind of aligned to the bottom, let's go here. Well, let's just do this for now. Let's write, so I'm gonna right justify it so it's flush against that line. So now here's another example of a layout that's still sticking to that same grid. So now you can see that as I switch back and forth between those pages, all the elements are still aligned to that grid I set up. So that's something I'm going to be looking for, is creating that underlying grid system. And you can keep it simple if this is something that you're having a little trouble getting a grasp of. 6x9 is a lot of spaces. Maybe start by, I like to use 3s because it's a whole big design thing, work in 3s. Those of you familiar with photography or film probably know what I mean. But like I said, experiment. Start with something simple, like 3x4 is a good place to start. So I'm going to be looking for that underlying grid system, as I kind of showed you how to set up here. I'm also going to look for those principles you learned in typography, which is the last kind of graphic design class you took. So I'm looking for contrast, alignment, repetition, proximity, the 4 design principles that we covered. If you need a refresher on those or don't know what I'm talking about, contact me via email and I will give you the resources you need. And other than that, just feel free to contact me with any other questions you might have.